Aren't some of those worldviews inherently incompatible, though, where one is so completely foreign and alien to another one that putting them in the same boat would be almost a betrayal of what the original intent was?
Well, even in order to know that they are incompatible, you have to have made the effort at comparing them. And
well, yeah.
in effect, you could never know a priori that they're incommensurable one with another. There is, unfortunately, what prevails in academic methodology is a kind of idiotism which says each philosopher invents his own world, and it's never safe to go transferring terminology from one philosopher to another. How could you know that one philosopher really meant the same kind of thing by his propositions, his concepts, and so on, the same thing as another? So you're caught in a sort of vicious private language argument here, where each philosopher is like a monad, and he has his own vision of the world. This is a very vicious approach to philosophy, because it takes for granted that philosophy is just made up out of whole cloth. And
well, in that case, you then need to be more creative in your interpretation.
Sure.
You have to sort of collaborate with them.
Exactly right. You can't understand philosophy except by philosophizing yourself. You understand philosophy by bringing your own philosophical resources to it.
Right.
The idea that a philosophy can be understood passively, with a sort of literal-minded or academic approach, this betrays the very spirit of philosophy.
Yeah.
It turns philosophy into a neutral, objective thing of some sort.
Okay, but what happens if that just goes so completely, totally wrong, in the wrong direction, as has happened, well, for example, with Dave Sim?
Well, I mean, where someone is
has created a self-conflicting and encompassing little worldview that is perfectly reasonable in its own terms, but when applied to a larger scale or some other different form, it falls apart of its own weight.
Well, what is really philosophical is the versatility of being able to maneuver among different perspectives.
Right.
So, I mean, the fact that someone can contrive a little system of terminology or a scheme of logic or whatever, if he does this but really still suffers from a sort of perspectival idiotism, where he's caught in his own web, and he can't, he doesn't know how to get outside his perspective. He has no perspective on his perspective. This to me is this is the most insidious betrayal of philosophy. It capitulates to opinion, blind faith. To be rational, it's necessary to be self-critical, and to be self-critical, you have to have the flexibility and mobility of perspective to be able to look at everything that you say and write from many different viewpoints. A strong, good, healthy, sane philosopher, as opposed to an ideologue, is someone who has as much diversity of intelligent perspectives in him as a novelist. A novelist who writes everything from the same point of view, this is like being sentenced to 20 years of the same meals. I mean, philosophy is versatility. It's taking full advantage of the plasticity of language, implication, etc. Now we tend to think that philosophy takes place in sort of perspectively controlled circumstances. So, we go into a philosophy class, we shed all of our political, religious, personal, other perspectives, and the philosophy professor is careful only to mention issues that don't arouse any controversial potential.
Yes.
So this artificially constricts the whole zone of the issues of the class down to things that no one really cares about and that really have no worldly import or human import. Neutralized issues described in neutralized terminology are, to me, what constitute the fallacious artificialisms of academic culture. We should be able to look at all those highly charged perspectivisms that make up the world outside. This is what Marx was doing. It's what Kierkegaard and Nietzsche were doing, Kafka. Instead of searching for a simplistic and facile neutrality, we need to have the kind of energetic self-discipline that can maintain its sobriety in the midst of heated controversies. An objectivity that is cheap and easy to acquire is really worth about that much. I find it remarkable that there is as little appetite for controversy as there is on most campuses. I've heard academic culture described as a form of narcolepsy, which I think is largely appropriate. Students need some way of orienting themselves in terms of the turbulence of political and cultural and moral life. They need to be aware of the fact that when they leave the universities, they are never again going to be thinking under these kinds of artificial laboratory conditions. It's far more vital for a course in philosophy to serve, in my way of thinking, far more vital for it to serve the purpose of being a kind of inoculation. You receive, under controlled circumstances, some exposure to the germs of the real world. And the purpose is not that you keep your mind antiseptic, but that you learn to overcome the irrationalisms that really govern the society outside the classroom.
I think probably art is the best way of getting a gathering of all these different types of perspectives.
The right literature, the right art, yes. There are not many imaginations that learn how to harness other perspectives without killing them, without over-controlling them, letting other ways of seeing the world be what they are, without controlling them judgmentally or chemically changing them by a certain critical perspective on them. That's a very tough, it requires being able to empathize with other perspectives than just one's own. And this goes back to the issue of how to be more than just a simple-minded ego.
Yeah.
And those are not virtues which our educational system tends to teach. We're content to let people go through college and exit the exact same kind of narrow-minded ego they were when they went in.
Right. But do you see there's any kind of essential needed compromise by sort of encoding truths in a fictional construct as opposed to simply delivering the message unfiltered?
Sure. Fiction has many, many advantages. It has the advantage of showing individuals what the living, concrete shape of an idea or a value is. You don't just deal with it in abstracto as a sort of artificial terminology. It's not a theoretical construct. It's something that people really care about and see from a certain perspective, and they inhabit the things they believe in. And in some cases, many cases of modern ideologies, they inhabit things that may well be lunacies. Orwell said there are some things that are so absurd that only an intellectual could believe them. That's really what we've done to our intellectual class. We've created a little hothouse world of one or another kind of institution where they're privileged to be exempt from the turbulence of existence. And they don't know how to live any other way. They are that specialized. So from this exemption, from this abstracted kind of existence, they arrive at a false notion of what truth, values, etc. They start presuming that everything in a society really exists for the sake of intellect. And if you listen to some professors of philosophy talking about the history of philosophy, they seem to think that philosophers are the true revolutionaries. They think Western civilization has taken certain paths because certain theorists came along and expounded certain systems and points of view. It doesn't occur to them that perhaps philosophers are very often symptoms of their cultures. And very few people other than other philosophers read and are convinced by philosophers. It may take centuries for the ideas of a philosopher to trickle down and have an impact on even other theorists.
Mm-hmm.